Ladies, gentlemen, and exiles of all ages, Path of Exile 2 Early Access is coming out today, and with this release, as someone who has now played through the early game section of this game 3 different times at different stages in its development, I thought it might be a good idea to put a video together for people completely new to Path of Exile, jumping into this game for the first time. Essentially, this is going to be a smattering of more basic tips to just keep you from getting overwhelmed, and thank you to the people behind Path of Exile for sponsoring this video. The game is a ton of fun, even the campaign is really enjoyable, but a lot of new things are going to be happening all around you, and there's a chance that you might do something that you later regret, or just realize that could have been done in a much easier way. So this is basically just, hey, keep these things in the back of your mind, and you can have a much simpler time tackling some of the more complicated parts of your introduction to the game and the series. First and foremost, and this is a really big distinction from the first Path of Exile game, and maybe something that scared a bunch of people off from playing that as well, which is now in Path of Exile 2, you can reset passive skill tree points extremely easily, simply for a cost of gold once you unlock the function very early in Act 1 of the campaign. There is no fear to be had around skill points in PoE 2, even your ascendancy skill tree points, which is your subclass once you reach that, can be reset too. The only real permanent skill tree based choice is which ascendancy itself that you have and which one you choose, so make sure that you are certain when you make that choice. On which note, if you are unsure about what to expect with those, we have a whole video describing the important nodes within each ascendancy skill tree already up on the channel if you'd like to sort of plan ahead and work out what sounds fun to you. That said, it's also worth noting the developers have stated they are not necessarily married to the idea of your ascendancy being unchangeable forever, so that is something that could actually change later on in early access, potentially when more ascendancies are added to the already existing base classes, but that's how it's going to be for now at the beginning. Moving on from this, take advantage of your orbs. Do crafting. You will get crafting materials in small amounts early and large amounts late in the game, so don't be afraid to use what you do get early because it'll be replaced later on much easier. A proper rare item early in the game can make you way more powerful than you would be without it, even in the campaign itself, so do not be afraid to interact with this system. Purposefully go out of your way to try and use it. Even if you don't succeed all that well, you are risking extremely little early on, and it will help you come to grips with a very important system for when it gets more relevant later in the game too. On a similar note, disenchant pretty much all gear that you can that you're not going to use. You can sell gear, you can disenchant gear, but I would recommend disenchanting everything you can, and it works on everything above common rarity, and it turns into shards of crafting orbs. If you collect enough of these shards, you get a whole crafting orb, so you can basically just turn items that you don't want into the materials to let you craft on new items and make them into things that you actually do want to use instead. Full circle towards improving your equipment and getting actual upgrades. Outside of this, don't fully prioritize offense at the cost of defense in this game, especially with the fact that the skill tree is very malleable and resettable. If you find yourself dying a lot even early in the game, you can always rework your first few skill tree nodes. You may not be able to get bonuses to your maximum life pool from your skill tree all that much anymore because of the way that they've changed it since Path of Exile 1, but there are tons of other ways you can get defense from your skill tree, and you should. If you've played other ARPGs a fair amount, you may expect that the best way to overcome every hurdle is just pure offense. If you do enough damage, you can delete everything before it even hits you, and pure offense can take you a long way if you build it up properly. But this game is specifically built to push you towards taking defensive options as well and reaching a sort of balance between the two. There will be a time and an activity type where pure raw speed and damage is the most important thing, but that is not necessarily the case for the campaign unless you are absolutely cracked, and it can change depending on your class as well. Speaking of things that can change based on your class, try out different weapon types. Most classes have at least 2 types of weapon that they can wield, some of which giving access to different skills, if not just gameplay styles to begin with. Warriors can either play with big 2-handed weapons to do big damage, or you can play with a one-hander and a shield, giving you a skill that lets you actively block all non-telegraphed attacks if you use it effectively. Witch can use a wand for more of a spell damage focus, scepters for more of a minion focus, and you can even have a wand in your main hand and a scepter in your offhand if you want to get creative with this. The point is that there is a lot of different potential weapon combinations. Don't get too carried away with it necessarily. You don't really want to try it right at the start of the game using a crossbow as a level 2 sorceress or anything like that, but you can mess with stuff like that later on if you want to. I just recommend being at least a little bit leveled before you try it. But consider what makes sense for your class, how it might affect your gameplay, especially as long term there are weapon set specialization skill points for your passive skill tree, which let you assign skill points for each of your 2 weapon sets individually, making them apply under different circumstances as a result. The next main bit of advice that I have, especially for newer players, is just take it slow. Don't feel like you have to start blasting from the get-go, going at maximum speed. Take your time. Don't avoid the bosses. Don't avoid major enemies just because they're optional, and really try to get the most out of what you have at each stage. This is a game where even the campaign can feel really punishing at certain points, depending on how you've built yourself. Even an optional boss that you come across can turn you to dust in a matter of just a few hits. Sometimes this is a skill or a knowledge gap that can be solved by working out a mechanic or a puzzle. Sometimes this is a raw gear issue, because while PoE 2 and its bosses, for the most part, allow a very player skill-based system where you can actively dodge the vast majority of the actual meaningful damage, there are still moments in between these, and while you can try to dodge like every single sword swing from a melee enemy, if you are in a place where you have to do that just to survive the fight, you may just have skipped out on some progression along the way that could make you a little bit more powerful. This is a thing that can happen, so take your time when working your way through. Don't treat each zone as just a stepping stone to the next. Immerse yourself in it. Don't rush to the end game, because the end game's not complete right now in early access. Of course, we have a fair amount, but actually enjoy every part of the game that we currently have. It's not done, so make the most of what there is. Kill the baddies, beat the bosses, get the goodies, and scale your power as a result. That said, within that sort of section, I mentioned how dodgeable a lot of boss attacks and mechanics are, and for that reason, you really do want to get acquainted with the way that the dodge roll mechanics works in PoE 2. This is even new for people who played the first game. This is your main method of effectively dealing with a lot of the different boss mechanics, and a lot of these mechanics are designed off of the tools that the player has available. The pacing of certain attacks or telegraphs are what they are because the dodge roll exists and the devs want you to use it, so definitely get used to using it. And hey, not just for bosses either, as this can be invaluable while kiting regular mobs out in the open world too. If you start to get surrounded at any point, your best option is generally to roll towards a direction and try to get out of the middle of a group. Otherwise, you'll just get mashed and clobbered by a whole bunch of things at the same time. Then just a couple of smaller things to sort of round it all off. The first is that by purchasing the Founders Packs that you need to do to gain access to early access of Path of Exile 2, you will be given some of the paid in-game currency. If you are new to Path of Exile games in general, the best way that you will be spending this initial currency is pretty much undoubtedly on stash tabs. It's the only real functional microtransaction within the game, and the only thing that isn't purely aesthetic. That said, don't feel like you need to buy the stash tabs instantly either. It's always worth waiting just until you need them, just in case, because in the first Path of Exile game, these stash tabs would actually go on sale every 3 weeks or so. And while this may not be a thing in early access for Path of Exile 2, it could still be a thing, so patience is a virtue. Really, you might end up saving yourself some currency, which could let you get a cool skin later on. The other thing is, don't be afraid to ask for help or search for it online from other players. We're trying here on this channel to be a good resource for players who are mostly new to the Path of Exile series, but there is a ton of more in-depth information on specific systems that other people have put hundreds or thousands of hours into. Because they're keeping a lot of the same design philosophies, there's a lot of carryover from Path of Exile 1 into Path of Exile 2. So feel free to ask us. You may even get help from people in our comment section to answer your questions, and if not, they'll usually be able to direct you to the place where your questions can be answered instead. Path of Exile 2 as a concept is not something that you can really cover the entirety of as one person. It is vast, it is deep, and knowledge of the game, proper, meaningful knowledge, is going to be a community effort more than anything else. That just about does it for today. Then everyone, some bits and tips of advice for newer players heading into Path of Exile 2 today on early access launch. If I had to choose one thing to sort of sum it all up, it's don't be afraid. Try not to get overwhelmed. Be okay with being imperfect at the start. Be okay with being inefficient, and just let yourself have some fun. Explore, experience the class that seems interesting to you, and the skills that sound enjoyable to actually use. Give the game your respect, interact with its mechanics, but you don't have to plan out your entire passive skill tree from the get-go. Just take it at your own speed and enjoy it for what it is. Thanks again to the folks behind Path of Exile for sponsoring this video. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.